Geldiğiniz için çok teşekkür ederiz. Herkes Alberto Manguel'i tanıyor ve biliyor olsa gerek. Onun için kendisi hakkında bir şey söylemek istemiyorum başlangıç olarak. Ve ben doğrudan doğruya kendisiyle bu akşam bu başlık nereden de çıktı onu da açıklayarak ve İngilizce konuşacağım. Vakit kazanalım diye biraz. Hemen soruma başlıyorum. Well, you know the title of this?
No.
No, you don't. Nobody told you.
You tell me.
Okay. It is reading words and reading images.
Okay.
I got that from Shakespeare. In fact,
Ah.
I just get it. You will remember, I'm sure you will remember, in Hamlet, when Polonius met in certain point with Hamlet, there is a dialogue between them, which goes...
What are you reading, my lord? Words, words.
Exactly, that is it. Enter Hamlet, reading on a book. Queen is talking, but look where sadly the poor wretch comes reading. Polonius, away I do beseech you, both away I will board him presently, or give me leave and exit. Exeunt, king and queen. Then Polonius asks, how does my good lord Hamlet? Very well, etc., etc. And then, what do you read, my lord? Because he's reading. Words, words, words. What is the matter, my lord, between whom and etc.? And then he asks, what it is about books, about the book. And he gives an example of what he is reading, and I couldn't find out what he really is reading. But he is not reading, and he doesn't say he reads, let's say, Aristoteles or Tacitus or Ovidius, something like that, but he's reading words.
Mm-hmm.
Do we read words, really? Or what?
Hamlet is making fun of Polonius.
Oh, yeah.
He knows perfectly well what he's asking, and he answers words, words, words, because of course any text is made out of words. Jean Cocteau said that any book is a dictionary in disorder. They are words. But obviously when we read, we forget about the words. We read the story that the book is telling us, and even though the story is made out of words, the words dissolve in a narrative flow that makes the story that the book tells us come to life. It is extraordinary when you think, if any of you think about any book that you read, you don't remember the precise words. You remember some scenes, you remember some dialogue, some characters, you never remember the whole. Perhaps when we read poetry it is different because we can memorize the poem. But usually a novel, an essay, we don't memorize it. It comes to us in a flow of words, somewhat like a river or a stream is made out of drops of water, but we don't see the drops of water. What Hamlet is implying is that anything that we say, anything that we read, is made out of these very unreliable fragments which are words. And out of this very weak tool of language, we construct the memory of our experience in order to communicate that experience to others. The great Spanish poet Francisco de Quevedo said that reading is a dialogue with the dead. And in that definition of reading, there is the essence of that magical act, because it breaks down the barrier of time and the barrier of space. We can converse with people who are not there, who could not have known us, from other cultures, from other centuries, and their voices come to us to talk to us and allow us to learn from that experience. You mentioned Aristotle, you mentioned Ovid. That experience is ours now. There's one more thing. This discovery of the magic of reading is very, very ancient. In Mesopotamia, where writing was invented, some 1,000 years only after the invention of writing, so about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, we have a letter in a clay tablet that says, I received your words, and it was as if you were here with me, and I could embrace you. So even then, they realized that the art of writing, and therefore the art of reading, eliminates the barriers of time and space.
Yeah. And also, you mentioned in some time, reading is not a finite thing. You always reread and it goes on. Well, for instance, I remember you are going back to Dante and the Divina Commedia several times, and I'm sure you will again go. And this, this endlessness of reading is, if it only depends on words, will be impossible. It will be finite. But it is more than words. That is another thing. I mean, rereading a book.
It only depends on words. If we see words as the molecules that make up this reality that we call fiction. Independently, the molecules have their existence, but it is when they come together and they constitute some matter that they become alive, and we are those molecules. But perhaps what you were saying about not reading the same text over and over again, the text is like a river, like Heraclitus's river, in which we never bathe twice. It is never the same river. And we visit the text, and the text changes because we have changed. In fact, translation, which is so essential to the history of literature, is a way of granting a text a certain immortality. It lives through the translations. Every generation translates its classics and gives it a new voice, and therefore gives it new life. And this life is so important that in many cases it speaks to our reality, which is why in countries that have dictatorships or semi-dictatorships, the writers are put into prison, the journalists are put into prison because they speak of our experience, and this frightens those in power. They're always frightened of those words that Hamlet read. And so they think that by putting those writers and journalists in prison, they will silence them. Never has a writer been silenced by prison. Never has censorship worked, because readers exist to bring those writers out of prison. And every time that you read a banned writer or a banned journalist, you are granting them their freedom.
And also reading a book or a writer is giving the remembrance of this writer is a new life to that writer. Even the dead writers
not as much to the writer but to the text, because the writer is of very little importance. The writer is dead the moment that the writer puts the final word to the text. Because what do you do if the person that opens the doors of what you most love, which is literature, turns out to be somebody who is condemned by that same literature? So do you sweep your love for literature aside because of him, or do you ignore what he did? In order to resolve this in myself, I wrote this novel, which is about a man, a French man who is in the military, and he is a very good father, and he is a very good husband, and he appreciates literature and music. And you discover, I'm spoiling the ending, that in the end, his wife realizes that he is one of the French military that the French sent to Argentina to teach the Argentinian military techniques of torture. This happened. And she discovers it, and of course, well, the end of the novel, you can imagine what happens. But that's why I wrote the novel, News from a Foreign Country Came. And to me, it's important because it's not that it answers the question, but it puts into words this terrible anguish that I felt at the time.
Well, this novel also, I was thinking about, for instance, Ezra Pound. Well, he may be a fan of Mussolini and is a fascist, etc. But he is a good poet. Do we have a right to divide a person like that?
Well, we have to.
Or should we read him under his own personality?
We have to divide it because readers have a superstition. You think that if you read a wonderful poem or you read a wonderful novel or essay, the writer has to be a wonderful person. But in many cases, that is not so. In many cases, first of all, the writer doesn't know what he or she is doing. It is a kind of intuition and craft and practice, but there is no formula to create that story that will touch you. And there is no obligation on the part of the writer to be a good person. Look, Shakespeare, whom you mentioned, nobody will deny that Shakespeare is a great poet, a great playwright. And he ends his life as a tax collector. Can you imagine in society, well, he could have been a politician, which is worse, but a tax collector. And he was certainly not a very loved person. With his wife, he must have had a very difficult relationship because in his will, he leaves her his second best bet.
Yes.
So Hamlet doesn't make a good person. Lear doesn't make a good person. But then we have Lear, we have Hamlet, and we can forget about Shakespeare.
Shall we move from here to fabulous monsters, because Hamlet is a fabulous monster, isn't he? You mentioned as fabulous monsters, one of them is shocking, and he's the Monsieur Bovary.
Yeah. Well, let me explain what the book is.
Characters there, and they are fabulous.
The idea came because I wanted to write about characters that I loved, that interested me. And so I chose Little Red Riding Hood. I chose not Hamlet, but Hamlet's mother, poor Gertrude. Can you imagine having a son like Hamlet? It mustn't have been easy for her. Monsieur Bovary, because he's always forgotten, but he is such an essential character, and so on. I have two Turkish characters, Asivet and Karagos. And why did I call it Fabulous Monsters? Because there is a passage in Alice in Wonderland, which is one of my favorite books, where Alice meets the unicorn. And the unicorn says, "What is this?" And they tell him, "This is a girl." And he thought, but I thought that girls were fabulous monsters. And Alice says, "Well, I thought that unicorns were fabulous monsters." And the unicorn says this lovely thing to her: "Let's make a deal. If you believe in me, I'll believe in you." Which is what happens when we read a book. It's a convention with a contract between the characters that we love and us. And the characters say to you, if you believe in me, I will believe in you and show you who you really are and put into words what you really feel and fear. And these are the fabulous monsters.
And readers are also the fabulous monsters.
Of course, the characters say to the reader, you are a fabulous monster, and like the unicorn, if you believe in me, I would believe in you.
Yeah. Yes. We are also going to publish your Packing My Library in translation next year too.
Yes.
2 books are coming from you.
Wonderful.
An elegy and 10 digressions. I was going to ask, there you are telling, and when I read it, I feel really sad about this.
I do too.
You know, packing the books. I have packed my books several times. I moved from Samsun to Ankara to Istanbul, and many houses I changed. But yours is much more sad too, because...
Well, some 20 years ago, I found finally a place for my library. It's not a small library, it's about 40,000 books. So the place needed to be big. And in an area of France, south of the Loire, there is a region, very beautiful region, but that the French don't really like, and so the real estate is very cheap. So we found a wonderful house, a presbytery, where the priest had lived, which was from the 12th century. And it was attached to a church that was from the 11th century, and that had been built on the ruins of a temple to Dionysius. Mm-hmm. Oh. And that's why the village was called Mont Dion, Mount Dionysius. Mm-hmm. So we settled there, and in the old stone barn we built the library. And it was paradise. Mm-hmm. And so we lived there for 15 years, and I thought I would die there very happily, among my books, among the fruit trees. And unfortunately, after 15 years, for stupid bureaucratic reasons, we had to leave. So we had to sell the house, we had to pack the books, and the books are all now in a storage room in Canada. We live in New York in an apartment the size of this table. And you cannot fit 40,000 books in an apartment this size. So they're still there. I hear them call it to me at night. But something in me knew that we would have to give up this paradise, because the definition of paradise is a place that you lose.
Yeah. And you tell that story of paradise in Library at Night. I mean,
well,
it's a marvelous
Library
book
at Night,
and a marvelous story.
In Library at Night, there are references because we had just moved to that place. Packing my library is a kind of last chapter, which is why it's called an elegy. Yeah. I mourn for this lost place, for this lost paradise, for my buried books.
Yes. You're still in packs.
They're still in boxes, awaiting the day of the resurrection.
Well, I hope
Inshallah.
they will get free of those boxes. Well, do we have time?
Yes, sure.
All right. I'm going to. We learned somewhat that you became the director of Argentina Public Library. Are you still in there?
No. After we left France, we settled in New York, and 6 months after that, I get a message from the Argentinian government offering me the position of director of the National Library. And I thought, on the one hand, I had just left France, I had just settled in New York. Can I take this on? And on the other hand, I thought Borges had been the director of the library. And to refuse the position would be an act of arrogance. So I decided to go back. I hadn't been back to Argentina for 50 years. So I went back, I worked as director as best I could for almost 3 years. And it was an extraordinary experience, but I was in the middle of Argentinian politics and Argentinian union politics and bureaucracy. And if you look at politics from outside, it's horrible. Mm-hmm. If you look to politics from inside, it's even more horrible. It's like looking at the intestine of some loathsome beast, where the only thing that thrives is corruption and ambition. I always thought, perhaps literature deceived me, that you can maneuver in politics with honesty, with an idea that you can construct something good for your society. And there are politicians that have done that. Václav Havel in Czechoslovakia, and Ataturk, of course, in Turkey. These are models of politicians, but they're the tiny exception in this vast horde of repulsive creatures that think only of their own interest. So I was in that, and after almost 3 years, my doctor said, you have to leave or you will die in the library. And my son said to me, if you die in the library, I will kill you. So I decided to go back.
Okay, right, good. Yeah, maneuvering in the politics, it seems impossible to me, but maybe some do. Even Virgil couldn't do it in this, the death of Virgil in this beautiful novel. Broch, and Augustus is always pressing on in, like it's still dictature, or even on Vergilius. It's beautiful to be translated into Turkish as well, that novel.
Then I recommend everyone to read it. It's a wonderful novel.
Wonderful novel.
I don't notice those fragments. I see you with a book in front of you yourself and speaking to me. So that narrative impulse exists when we look at images, and it's unavoidable. And I was fascinated by that dictatorship of our brain.
Great, thank you. Well, I have lots of other questions, but I don't have...
I have lots of other answers.
All right. What is the question? What is the answer, asks the Gertrude Stein.
Gertrude Stein, yes, yes. When she was
never get an answer.
Well, when she was dying, her last words were, what is the answer? And nobody said anything. So she said, well, in that case, what is the question?
So, thank you very much, and I think there are some questions.
So,
yeah, a few questions are coming up.
Hello, I'm a translator. In fact, I'm translating The Fabulous Monsters at the moment.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes, so I know that you're a translator as well, besides being an author. So I'm curious about what you think of translation. Do you think this very common and popular issue about translation is that whether it's a creative activity or whether it's just an automatic copying activity?
Thank you for asking that question. I think it's very important. Not only is translation a creative activity, but it is one of the most important activities in literature. Literature wouldn't exist without translation. We would have to read every language in the world to have Dostoevsky, to have Kafka, to have Tampinar. Without translation, there is no literature. So, not only is it important because it brings all these works to our library when we speak one or two languages, but translation helps renew the text. Translation helps bring the different books into our time through the language of that translator. And I believe the translator has to have absolute freedom. There are two opposing schools of translation, as you know. One is the literal-minded. Nabokov believed that you had to translate a text exactly as it stood in the original. And so the mistakes in the original or the passages that are difficult are passages that are difficult and mistakes, but made on purpose. Conceiving a work as perfectly structured is an illusion. A work depends on the language in which it is written, and therefore, if it passes into another language, it has to reincarnate. Borges, speaking of the process of writing, he said that every time that a writer writes a draft, that draft is a version of the text exactly as valid as the first one. And there's no reason to say that version 10 is inferior to version 6. Now, not only that, he says that the concept of the definitive text belongs only to religion or fatigue. Where the writer says, I'm tired of revising, I just send it to the publisher. But not only that, he says the translation is another draft of the original. Yes. That is to say, he grants the translator the power of making a different version of what the translator finds. And I think that's perfect, because there are works that are, for me as a reader, better in translation than in the original. For instance, the great German writer Arno Schmidt, he translated the very bad Victorian novels of Bulwer Lytton from the 19th century. But he translated them in such a beautiful German that they are works of art. So, kudos to the translator, and I think that your name should be emblazoned on the cover far larger than the name of the author. Because what you're reading is your work. It's not, when people read me in Turkish, they're not reading me. They're reading your words, going back to Hamlet. If literature depends on the words that we use, then the translation belongs to the translator.
Can I add a small comment? You were talking about versions. I mean, the draft being a version and a second revision being another version. It's the same with translation, I feel. Because when I revise my own text, it becomes another translation. Sometimes because the feeling changes, when words change, the atmosphere changes sometimes, it becomes another version.
Well, I'm very lucky to have you as translator.
Thank you. I'm very, very happy translating you.
Thank you for your wonderful conversation. My question is about empathy with the characters or with the monsters. When we read, or when I read Madame Bovary or Julien Sorel today, I just find them somehow ridiculous. And one of my literature teachers told me once that novel is irony. So do we misread these novels? Do I really get into empathy with my ridiculous characters, with their faults and with their ridiculous lives? Or do you really have empathy with them? I don't know.
Some readers have empathy with Madame Bovary and some don't, like you. But it happens when we meet people in real life. Somebody tells us how much he or she suffered, and you think, oh, you know, I don't want to hear that story, it's completely ridiculous, it's the fault of the person and so on. Or you feel empathy towards that person. It's a question of chemistry between the character and you. And you might feel empathy for a character that I think is horrible and I don't feel any empathy whatsoever. I think empathy is such a personal question. The character will try to convince you that his or her actions are justified or depend on fate, or has been decreed by certain circumstances, or it's not his or her fault. But that's what happens in real life. How many times you meet somebody who has gone through difficult circumstances and you think, well, it's his fault, or no, he had bad friends who influenced him, or he was caught in some circumstances that were not of his making. So you shouldn't feel worried if you don't feel empathy for Madame Bovary, because many characters in the novel don't feel empathy for her. The one that feels most empathy for her, who loves her deeply, is her husband.
Thank you. So we have discussed that there is a pleasure in rereading a text that we already love and know. And I think there is a pleasure in reading something for the first time, which we remember from our childhood, for example, that sense of wonder. So my question to you is twofold. First, do you miss that feeling of wonder, of reading something good for the first time? And second is on methodology. How do you choose what you should read for the first time now? Are you cautious? How should you read?
Good question. But in answer to the first question, of course, you know, I would give anything to be a reader for the first time of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because the idea that comes from the title, that there are two characters, and you end up discovering that the horrible Mr. Hyde is Dr. Jekyll, is something that you cannot revisit. You can reread it with great pleasure, but that initial pleasure doesn't come back. It's like the first time you fall in love. You will never have that first time again. How do I choose what to read for the first time? Many ways. A good review, a great cover, a wonderful translator whose name I recognize. But the same with people. You know, you see someone and you think there's some kind of sympathy. And maybe after speaking to that person for a few minutes, you think, oh, like Madame Bovary for you, I won't see this person again. Or you become suddenly friends. How do you explain that? You don't explain it. But it's wonderful when it happens.
May I add something to that? From time to time, the book calls you.
Of course.
It was there and he asked you to come and take me.
Yes, absolutely.
In a bookshop, in a library, it happens to me, I don't know. It's crazy, but it calls you.
Not more crazy than being attracted to one person among the millions and millions in the world.
It calls. Okay.
Hello, first of all, welcome to Turkey. I want to ask a question that's kind of related to education because I'm a teacher. One of the biggest problems I have with my high school students is that it's very hard to get them to love literature or to pick up a book for the pleasure of it. And I think that you kind of talked about that there could be literacy in the terms that you're reading it. Also, you can read a picture, like you said, and I think our generation, the future generations that we will see, are very quickly moving into leaving behind literature and creating images. For example, you are from New York, maybe you know the Humans of New York on Instagram. There is a photographer who tells stories through pictures, so I would like to hear your opinion about what do you think will happen to the young kids that we are seeing and we will see in the future. Do you think that is it okay that they're losing this love for literature and moving into images? Thank you.
In a culture of images, the readers of text feel that there is something more valuable or deeper in the text. And Horace, in the 1st century, opposes the images to the word and says, when do the images become words? What do they have? Which one has more value? My generation, we read comic books. And comic books were supposed to be trash. And so we were taken, the comic books were taken away. We were told if we wanted to read, we should read real books. It's the same today. Comic books have acquired a hierarchical prestige. The graphic novel is a genre with exactly the same claims to literature as any novel. And I think that, as always, the number of readers is small. And so I don't know how to explain to young people the enormous power that reading would give them. There are so many reasons that detract them from reading. We are in a society that puts forward as values what is quick and easy. Reading is slow and difficult. How do you sell a product by saying, you will like this? This is slow and difficult, buy it. Nobody will go there. I think that the example can help. A passionate reader contagious their passion. The young people are not stupid, so if you are a hypocrite and you don't like reading but you have to teach reading, they will know it immediately. But if reading is in your guts, they will know that too, and they will suspect she likes it, so maybe there's something in that. And maybe if you are lucky, in a class of 30, you will have 2, 3 readers, and that's perhaps enough.
Son bir tane daha alsın.
Mr. Manguel, Borges was died, and are you looking for him? And what are you doing about dying?
What? Sorry? About what?
Dying.
Dying?
Yes.
Well, you know, we are immortal until the day we die. So I am prepared for that because my reading has taught me about it. My reading has taught me that death will be coming to the final pages of a wonderful book for which I'm so grateful to have been given it to live. And also, I have the intuition that literature has taught me what death is. So, for instance, in the death of Ivan Ilyich, Tolstoy, in telling the story of his death, says that he feels like one of those moments in the train where you don't know if it's going forward or backwards. We all have had that feeling. Maybe that will be that. Or, for instance, at the very end of La Voix Royale of Malraux, the narrator finds his friend who has been shot, and the narrator tells him, you will prepare for death. And his friend says in his last words, death? There is no death. It is me who is dying. So I think I will learn that death will be an active verb, and I hope that I will perform it correspondingly well.
Okay. So,
Mr. Manguel, first of all, welcome to Turkey. My question will be related to the question of the lady who has asked about reading. In Turkey, we have a population that did not have a great reading culture. I mean, this wasn't a country where everybody read. It still isn't. And my question would be, and now they are transitioning to electronic media. And we have conducted various reading campaigns and everything in this country, and we have not been very successful in generating a large reading public like in Germany or France or Britain or the United States or Russia. My question would be, what would you do in a society that does not traditionally have a widespread, deep reading culture to generate such a culture? Thank you very much.
You're asking for a magic formula which I don't have, but I would simply repeat what I said, that if readers are passionate about what they do, they can communicate that passion. And even if each one of us transforms a non-reader into a reader, immediately the population of readers would be doubled. So I don't know what to recommend. What I am certain doesn't work are the official campaigns where you have some soccer player or some actress saying, I read, you should read too. No, nobody believes that. It's a waste of money. There are some official programs that have worked quite well. For instance, in Colombia, the network of libraries goes into the little villages and provides a selection of books. So even if in the villages, not everybody reads, there will be one person who will read and then will read for the others. That old tradition of societies where you gather to hear stories. The same in Mexico. In Mexico, in the zones that are most violent because of the drug traffic, especially women set up in their homes reading groups. And it was proven that where they set up these groups, the young people would come because they don't have where to go. That's why they go into these gangs and so on. And the violence declined, but declined by 70%, 80% in some of those zones. So reading can still be effective. Reading can produce readers, but there is no magic formula.
All right, thank you. Well.